My family forgot my birthday for years, so I gave myself a gift they'll never forget. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who see you the least. I knew this truth in my bones long before I could put it into words. Growing up, I felt like a ghost in my own home, present but somehow invisible, especially on days that should have been special. Before we begin, comment where you're watching from, then let's continue the story. It started when I turned 10, a milestone birthday that should have been celebrated with cake, presents, and the kind of fuss that makes a child feel cherished. Instead, my mother was busy planning my sister Melissa's dance recital that happened to fall on the same weekend. "We'll do something for your birthday next weekend," my mother had promised, squeezing my shoulder before rushing off to iron Melissa's costume. Next weekend never came. When I quietly mentioned it 7 days later, my mother looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, honey, I completely forgot with everything going on. How about we get ice cream tomorrow?" Tomorrow became next week, which became, "We'll make it up to you for Christmas," which eventually faded into nothing at all. I told myself it was just bad timing. My sister was the dancer, the performer who needed costumes and rehearsals and constant attention. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who could take care of herself. I didn't need all that fuss. At least, that's what I trained myself to believe. By my 11th birthday, I had learned not to expect much. Still, I couldn't help the tiny flutter of hope when I came down to breakfast that morning. My father was reading the newspaper, my mother was packing Melissa's lunch, and there was no sign that anyone remembered what day it was. I waited for someone to look up, to smile, to say those simple words that every child deserves to hear once a year. The silence stretched on. Finally, my father glanced up. "You're going to miss the bus if you don't hurry," he said, before returning to his paper. That night, I blew out a candle I had stuck into my own peanut butter sandwich in the darkness of my bedroom. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered, making a wish that next year would be different. It wasn't. 12, 13, 14. The pattern continued with painful consistency. My birthdays became increasingly invisible, while Melissa's were planned weeks in advance. For Melissa's 16th, they rented a venue and invited 50 people. For my 16th 3 months later, my parents were away at a conference. They called the next day to apologize. "We're so sorry, sweetheart. The days just got away from us," my mother said, her voice genuinely apologetic but also distracted. I could hear Melissa in the background, talking about college visits. "We'll make it up to you." I had stopped believing those words years ago. By the time I was in college, I had accepted my place in the family hierarchy. I was the afterthought, the responsible one who didn't need attention, the one who understood when plans changed. I became the family mediator, the emergency contact, the one who drove 8 hours when Melissa broke up with her boyfriend and needed support. I was always there, always reliable, always forgiving. But something was changing inside me. Each forgotten birthday, each dismissed accomplishment, each time I was asked to rearrange my life to accommodate someone else's crisis, it all added up. The hurt calcified into something harder, something that couldn't be soothed with belated apologies or promises that were never kept. I started to notice things I'd previously overlooked. How my parents would interrupt my stories but hang on Melissa's every word. How they knew intimate details about Melissa's friends but couldn't remember the name of the man I had been dating for 6 months. How they criticized my career choices while bankrolling Melissa's 3rd attempt at finding herself. It wasn't just my birthday. It was everything. During my senior year of college, my roommate Sarah noticed something odd when we were decorating our apartment. "Where are your childhood photos?" she asked. I realized I didn't have any, not because they didn't exist, but because they'd never been shared with me. They were all sitting in albums at my parents' house, albums I'd flipped through countless times, seeing page after page of Melissa at recitals, Melissa at summer camp, Melissa with our parents on vacations I had been told were just quick work trips. My parents aren't really photo people, I lied, feeling a strange mix of shame and anger. Sarah, who came from a large and loving family, looked skeptical but didn't push. That Christmas, I noticed something else while helping my mother in the kitchen. On the refrigerator was a calendar with everyone's important dates circled in red. Melissa's birthday was there. My father's birthday was there. Even the dog's adoption anniversary was marked. I flipped forward to my birthday month. The day was blank. "Mom," I said quietly, "you forgot to mark my birthday on the calendar." My mother glanced over, spatula in hand. "Oh, did I?" "Well, it's not like I'm going to forget your birthday, silly." But she had. Every year for as long as I could remember. That night, lying in my childhood bed, I scrolled through my phone and found a photo of my 5-year-old self, the last birthday I could remember being truly celebrated. I was beaming at the camera, a party hat perched crookedly on my head, my father's arm around my shoulders. It was before Melissa's talents had been discovered, before the family dynamic had shifted so dramatically. "What changed?" I whispered to the smiling child in the photo. "When did you become so easy to forget?" The answer came to me slowly, like dawn breaking over a long, dark night. Nothing had changed. I had always been loved conditionally, valued for what I could give rather than who I was. The forgotten birthdays weren't an oversight. They were a symptom of something much deeper. I decided then that something needed to change. I couldn't keep pouring myself into a relationship that gave so little in return. I couldn't keep hoping that next year would be different, that next time they would remember, that someday I would matter enough to be seen. As I closed my eyes, a plan began to form in my mind. For my upcoming 25th birthday, I wouldn't remind them. I wouldn't drop hints. I would see what happened when I stopped working so hard to be remembered. And if they forgot again? Well, maybe it was time I gave myself the gift that no one else seemed willing to give. The gift of truth, the gift of freedom, the gift of finally being seen. Even if I had to be the one to make them see. The year I turned 14 was when I first realized that being forgotten wasn't just about birthdays. It was about my entire existence. That summer, my parents took Melissa to a national dance competition in Chicago. I was left with my grandmother because, as my mother put it, there wouldn't be anything for you to do there anyway. I remember sitting on my grandmother's porch, scrolling through social media, seeing photo after photo of my family at Navy Pier, at the Cloud Gate, eating deep dish pizza. Not a single "wish you were here" text. Not even a souvenir magnet when they returned. My grandmother must have noticed something was wrong. She sat next to me on the porch swing, her arthritis-swollen hands covering mine. "Your parents love you," she said quietly. "They just don't know how to show it to both of you at the same time." I nodded, not wanting to upset her by admitting the truth, that maybe they just didn't love me enough to try. When high school came around, I threw myself into academics. If I couldn't be the talented one, I'd be the smart one. I stayed up late studying, joined every academic club available, and maintained a perfect GPA. My report cards were immaculate, all A's, glowing teacher comments, even a recommendation for advanced placement. My father glanced at it over dinner one night. "Good job," he said before turning to Melissa. "Did you hear back about that summer intensive?" That's how it always went, my achievements acknowledged with the bare minimum of attention before the spotlight swung back to my sister. I wonder sometimes if things would have been different if my parents had divorced. Maybe if separated, one of them might have had the space to see me. Instead, They formed a united front of neglect, a partnership built on the unspoken agreement that Melissa was the star, and I was the understudy who never got called on stage. My 18th birthday fell on graduation day. I had been named valedictorian, an honor that required me to give a speech in front of the entire school. I spent weeks crafting it, practicing in front of my mirror until every word was perfect. The morning of graduation, my mother helped Melissa with her hair while I did mine alone. My father took dozens of photos of Melissa in her cap and gown in the front yard. I stood by, waiting for my turn in front of the camera. It never came. "We should get going," my father said, checking his watch. "We don't want to be late." At the ceremony, I gave my speech. I talked about futures and possibilities, about finding your place in the world. As I spoke, I scanned the audience for my parents' faces. They were there, but they weren't watching me. They were helping Melissa fix her cap, which had tilted to the side. That night, we went to dinner at a nice restaurant, not for my birthday, but to celebrate graduation. No one mentioned that it was also my birthday until the waiter brought out a cake with "Congratulations, graduates" written in frosting. "Oh, it's Tanya's birthday too," my mother suddenly remembered, her hand flying to her mouth. I completely forgot in all the excitement. The waiter looked embarrassed for me. He returned minutes later with a scoop of ice cream and a candle. My father tipped him generously, as if money could erase the hurt. College was my escape. I chose a school 3 states away, far enough that visits would be infrequent. For the first time, I built a life where I wasn't constantly overshadowed, where people knew me for me, not as Melissa's sister. I made friends who remembered my birthday. I dated guys who paid attention when I spoke. I created a chosen family that filled some of the holes my biological one had left. But every holiday, every break when I returned home, I slipped back into the role that had been assigned to me. The reliable one, the one who didn't need attention, the one who understood. In my junior year, I met Mark. He was different from anyone I'd dated before. Attentive, thoughtful, the kind of person who remembered not just birthdays, but the little details most people missed. On our 3rd date, he brought me a book I'd mentioned wanting to read weeks earlier. I nearly cried. "It's just a book," he said, confused by my reaction. "No one's ever listened to me like that before," I explained. Mark became my mirror, reflecting back to me all the ways I'd been taught to make myself small. He was the first person who asked why I never called my parents just to chat, why I always sounded exhausted after family visits, why I flinched when he tried to plan something special for my birthday. "They're not bad people," I found myself defending them. "They're just busy. Melissa's career takes a lot of time and you don't?" He interrupted. "Your time doesn't matter? Your feelings don't matter." Put that way, it was hard to argue. But patterns established over decades don't break easily. I kept going home for holidays. I kept being the good daughter. I kept hoping that something would change. My 24th birthday passed like all the others, forgotten, then remembered too late, followed by hollow apologies and half-hearted promises to make it up to me. By then, Mark and I were living together in an apartment near campus while I finished graduate school. He watched me hang up the phone after a brief, belated birthday call from my parents. No card had arrived. No gift. Just a 3-minute conversation dominated by my mother telling me about Melissa's latest achievement. "Enough," Mark said when I set down the phone. "You deserve better than this." I knew he was right. I'd always known, in a way. But having someone else see it, name it, validate the hurt I'd carried for so long, it changed something fundamental inside me. The clarity was both painful and liberating. For years, I'd been waiting for my family to change, to suddenly see me, to give me the love and recognition I'd been starving for. But people don't change unless they want to, and my family seemed perfectly content with the dynamic they'd created. The only person I could change was myself. That night, I made a decision. My 25th birthday was coming up in 6 months. It would be a test. One last chance for my family to show me that I mattered. I wouldn't remind them. I wouldn't drop hints. I would simply wait and see. And if they forgot again, I would stop waiting for them to give me what they had never been willing to give. I would stop pouring myself into a relationship that had been draining me dry for as long as I could remember. I would give myself the ultimate gift: freedom from the endless cycle of hope and disappointment that had defined my family relationships for 2 decades. Freedom to be seen, even if I had to be the one to make them see. As my 25th birthday approached, I found myself slipping into familiar patterns despite my resolution. I caught myself almost mentioning it during a phone call with my mother. Old habits die hard, I guess. For 2 decades, I'd been the one to ensure I wasn't completely forgotten. Dropping hints, mentioning plans, sometimes even flat out reminding them the week before. Not this time. This time would be different. Mark watched me with concern as I navigated this self-imposed test. "Are you sure about this?" he asked one night as we lay in bed. "It seems like you're setting yourself up for disappointment." "That's the point," I told him. "I need to know if they'll remember without me reminding them. I need to know if I matter enough to be remembered." The month of my birthday arrived. Each day that passed without a mention from my family felt like another small confirmation of what I already knew. I tried to focus on my thesis, on my relationship with Mark, on the life I was building away from the shadows of my childhood home. But the weight of anticipation hung heavy. 3 days before my birthday, my mother called. My heart skipped. Maybe she was calling to wish me an early happy birthday, or to tell me about some plans they'd made. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the year things changed. "Tanya," she said, her voice breathless with excitement. "You'll never believe it. Melissa got the lead in that touring production she auditioned for. They're going to 20 cities, including New York." My stomach dropped. "That's great," I managed to say. "We're throwing her a big send-off party this weekend. I know it's short notice, but we'd love for you to come home for it. She leaves for the tour next week, and who knows when we'll all be together again." This weekend, my birthday weekend, they were throwing a party, but not for me. "I can't," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have plans." "What plans could be more important than celebrating your sister's big break? This is huge for her, Tanya. She really wants you there." Did she? I wondered. Or was this my mother projecting her own desires onto Melissa, as she'd done so many times before? Not that it mattered. My decision was made. "I'm sorry, Mom. I already have commitments." I didn't elaborate. For once, I didn't justify or explain or apologize for putting myself first. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Well," my mother finally said, "I suppose we'll see you when we see you then." No guilt trip had ever been so transparent, so predictable. In the past, it would have worked. I would have rearranged my life, canceled my plans, if I'd had any, and driven 8 hours to stand in a corner at Melissa's party while everyone cooed over her accomplishments. Not anymore. After hanging up, I sat at my desk, staring at the calendar where I'd circled my own birthday in red pen, a quiet act of self-recognition. My mother's calendar probably still had that day blank, even as she was busy planning an elaborate party for the weekend. Mark found me there an hour later, still staring at the date. "They're throwing Melissa a going-away party," I told him, "on my birthday weekend." He knelt beside my chair and took my hands in his. "And what are we doing for your birthday?" The question caught me off guard. In all my focus on whether my family would remember, I hadn't actually made any plans for myself. "I don't know," I admitted. "Then it's time we figured it out," he said. "What do you want to do?" Not what would make your family happy. Not what would be convenient for everyone else. What would make you happy? I thought about it. What did I want? For so long, my desires had been secondary, pushed aside to make room for others. I hardly knew how to answer. I want to do something just for me, I finally said. Something that has nothing to do with being a good daughter, or a supportive sister, or anyone else's anything. I want one day that's completely mine. Mark smiled. Then that's exactly what we'll do. The morning of my birthday dawned bright and clear. I'd turned my phone off the night before, not wanting to spend the day checking for messages that wouldn't come. Instead, Mark and I drove to the beach 3 hours away, a place I'd always wanted to visit but had never made the time for. As I stood at the edge of the ocean, waves lapping at my feet, I felt something shift inside me. Here I was, celebrating myself, choosing my own happiness for once. The realization was both exhilarating and sad. Sad that it had taken me 25 years to get to this point. My phone stayed off until late that night, when curiosity finally got the better of me. I powered it up as Mark drove us home, watching as notifications populated the screen. A few birthday wishes from friends. Nothing from my parents or Melissa. They had forgotten. Again. Even with a party happening that same weekend, even with family gatherings and celebrations already on their minds, I hadn't crossed their thoughts. The confirmation hurt, but less than I'd expected. Perhaps because I'd already known the truth, had lived with it for most of my life. Or perhaps because for the first time, I'd given myself what I'd always wanted from them. Recognition, celebration, love that didn't come with conditions. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Tanya," she said, her voice a practiced mix of guilt and surprise. "I just realized, yesterday was your birthday, wasn't it? With all the chaos of Melissa's party, it completely slipped my mind." "Yes," I said simply. "It was." "I feel terrible," she continued, though she sounded more inconvenienced than remorseful. "We'll have to do something special when you come visit next. Maybe when Melissa gets back from her first tour stop." I cut her off. "Mom, I need to tell you something." "What is it, honey?" "Make it quick. I've got a million things to clean up after the party." I took a deep breath. The moment had come, the one I'd been building toward without even knowing it. The gift I was about to give myself was long overdue. "I won't be coming to visit," I said. "Not next month. Not when Melissa gets back. I'm done." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost see my mother's face. The weeks after my confrontation with my parents passed in a strange blur of emotions. Some days I felt liberated, like I'd finally set down a burden I'd been carrying my entire life. Other days, doubt crept in. Had I overreacted? Had I thrown away my family over something as trivial as forgotten birthdays? But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about birthdays. It was about a lifetime of being overlooked, undervalued, and taken for granted. It was about finally recognizing my own worth when no one else would. I expected my parents to call again, to argue, to plead, to guilt me into returning to the fold. But the silence from their end was deafening. It seemed they'd accepted my decision with surprising ease, which only confirmed what I'd suspected all along. I'd been expendable to them. Melissa, on the other hand, wasn't so easily deterred. Her texts became increasingly frequent and accusatory. "Mom's a mess because of you," one read. "Dad barely talks anymore. Is this what you wanted?" I didn't respond. "You're breaking up this family over nothing," another message declared. "You've always been so sensitive." Still, I didn't engage. Finally, 3 weeks after our initial confrontation, she called. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to pick up. "What do you want, Melissa?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. I want you to stop this ridiculous tantrum and apologize to Mom and Dad, she said. This has gone on long enough. This isn't a tantrum, I replied calmly. This is me finally standing up for myself after years of being treated like I don't matter. That's not true. They've always loved you. They've always supported you. Have they? I asked. When was the last time they attended any event that was important to me? When was the last time they remembered my birthday without being reminded? When was the last time a family gathering didn't revolve entirely around you? That's not fair, she protested. It's not my fault they pay attention to my career. I've never blamed you for that, I said honestly. This isn't about you, Melissa. It's about them, and it's about me. Well, it feels like it's about me, she snapped. Like you're punishing me because you think I got more attention. I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I'm protecting myself from people who have shown time and again that I'm not a priority to them. That's so melodramatic, she scoffed. You know what? Fine. Stay away. See if any of us care. The line went dead. I set down my phone, unsurprised by how the conversation had gone. Melissa had always been the golden child, shielded from criticism or accountability. Of course, she couldn't see what I was talking about. She'd never experienced the other side of our parents' conditional love. That night, Mark found me sorting through old photos. The few I had from my childhood, mostly school pictures or snapshots taken by friends' parents at group events. You okay? He asked, sitting beside me. I think so, I said. I just realized I have almost no family photos where anyone is looking at me. It was true. In every group shot, my parents were looking at Melissa, their expressions adoring. I was just there, an afterthought, a shadow at the edge of the frame. I think it's time to make new memories, Mark said, taking my hand. Ones where you're not in the shadows. Over the next few months, that's exactly what we did. I defended my thesis, graduated with honors, and accepted a job offer in a city 300 miles from my hometown. Mark and I found an apartment with a spare room he converted into an office for me, the first space that had ever been created with my needs in mind. I started therapy, working through the layers of hurt and neglect that had shaped my self-image. I learned to recognize the patterns I'd internalized, the tendency to make myself small, to prioritize others' needs, to apologize for taking up space. Slowly, I began to unlearn them. My 26th birthday approached. For the first time, I was looking forward to it rather than dreading the inevitable disappointment. Mark planned a surprise party, nothing elaborate, just our closest friends gathered in our apartment with cake and gifts and genuine affection. People who knew me, who saw me, who valued my presence in their lives. The night before my birthday, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. Hi, Tanya, it's your dad. Got a new phone. Your mother and I have been thinking a lot about what you said. We miss you. Happy birthday for tomorrow. I stared at the screen for a long time. It was the first time in 16 years that my father had remembered my birthday without being reminded. Part of me wanted to respond, to see if this small acknowledgement could be the beginning of something new. But another part, the part that had finally learned to protect myself, held back. This wasn't enough. One remembered birthday couldn't erase decades of neglect. One text couldn't rebuild the trust that had been broken over and over again. I showed the message to Mark. What should I do? I asked. What do you want to do? He countered. I thought about it. I want to acknowledge it without reopening the door, I finally said. I'm not ready to let them back in. Then that's what you should do. The next morning, my birthday, I sent a simple reply. Thank you for the birthday wishes. No emotion, no invitation for further contact, just a polite acknowledgement. My father didn't respond. Neither did my mother. Melissa didn't reach out at all. And for the first time, that was okay. I celebrated my birthday surrounded by people who chose to love me, who made me feel valued and seen. I didn't need my biological family's validation anymore. 6 months later, I received a letter from my mother. Inside was a birthday card, 6 months late, and a note that read, "I'm sorry we haven't been the parents you needed. If you're willing, we'd like to try to do better." I sat with that letter for days, turning it over in my mind. They were reaching out, which was more than they'd ever done before. But was it enough? Was it sincere? And even if it was I ready to risk being hurt again? In the end, I didn't respond. Not because I couldn't forgive them, but because I wasn't convinced they had truly changed. True change requires understanding, and nothing in that letter suggested they understood the depth of what had happened. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is knowing when to walk away. Sometimes the most powerful gift you can give yourself is the freedom to create a life where you are valued, respected, and truly seen. That's the gift I gave myself, and it was worth every painful step of the journey. The momentary confusion, followed by the dismissive smile she always wore when I said something she didn't want to hear. "What do you mean, done?" she finally asked. "Done with what?" "Done pretending," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Done acting like it's normal to be forgotten by my own family. Done being the backup child who only matters when it's convenient." "Tanya, you're being dramatic," my mother said, her tone shifting from confusion to irritation. "I said I was sorry about your birthday. We've been busy with Melissa's—" "It's not about my birthday," I interrupted. "Or it's not just about my birthday. It's about 25 years of being treated like I don't matter." "That's ridiculous. Of course you matter. We're your family." "Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you've never acted like it. You've never seen me, Mom. Not really, not once." I heard her inhale sharply. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but I don't appreciate your tone. Maybe when you've calmed down—" "I am calm," I said. "Probably calmer than I've ever been. That's why I can finally say this. I'm done being the person who gives everything and gets nothing in return. I'm done rearranging my life to accommodate everyone else's. I'm done hoping you'll suddenly start treating me like I matter." There was a long pause. When my mother spoke again, her voice had that familiar wounded quality that had worked so effectively on me in the past. "I don't know what we've done to deserve this. After everything we've sacrificed for you." I almost laughed. "What sacrifices, Mom?" "Name one thing you've ever sacrificed for me. One time you put my needs first. One occasion that was supposed to be about me that didn't somehow become about Melissa." "That's not fair. Melissa has special talents that require support." "And I don't? I was valedictorian. I got a full scholarship to graduate school. I'm about to defend my thesis. But you wouldn't know any of that because you've never asked. You've never cared." "Of course we care." My mother's voice rose in pitch. "We're your parents." "Being a parent is more than biology," I said quietly. "It's more than providing food and shelter. It's seeing your child, really seeing them. And you've never seen me." I heard shuffling on the other end. Then my father's voice replaced my mother's. "Tanya, what's going on? Your mother is upset." Of course she was. Of course that was his concern. "I was just explaining to Mom that I won't be visiting anymore," I said. "I'm stepping back from this family." "Don't be ridiculous," my father said. "You can't step back from family. Whatever's bothering you." "Do you know what yesterday was?" I asked. There was a pause. "Friday?" "It was my birthday, Dad. My 25th birthday. And neither you nor Mom remembered. Again. Just like you've forgotten every birthday since I was 10. That's not true, he protested, but without conviction. We've celebrated your birthdays. When? Name one birthday celebration you've arranged for me in the last 15 years. His silence was answer enough. Look, I said, I'm not having this conversation to make you feel guilty. I'm having it because I'm done pretending everything is fine when it's not. I'm done being the only one who puts any effort into this relationship. So you're just... what? Disowning us? The incredulity in his voice would have been comical if it wasn't so painful, as if the idea that I might walk away was unthinkable, even while they had emotionally walked away from me years ago. I'm protecting myself, I clarified. I'm choosing my own well-being for once. This is absurd, my father said. I'm putting your mother back on. More shuffling, then my mother's voice again, now tearful. Tanya, please, don't do this. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Just come home and we'll talk about it. Home. The word hung in the air between us. That house had stopped being my home a long time ago, if it ever truly was. I can't do that, Mom. Not anymore. Is this about Melissa? She demanded, anger breaking through the tears. Are you jealous of your sister? Is that what this is? And there it was, the accusation I'd been waiting for. The one they'd used to dismiss my feelings since childhood. If I ever expressed hurt or disappointment, it was because I was jealous of my talented, special sister. Never because their treatment of me was genuinely hurtful. This isn't about Melissa, I said. It's about you and Dad and the way you've treated me my entire life. Melissa is just the excuse you've used to justify it. I don't recognize you anymore, my mother said, her voice hardening. This isn't like you at all. She was right about that, at least. This wasn't like the Tanya they knew. The one who swallowed her hurt, who never complained, who arranged her life around everyone else's needs. The one who had spent 25 years trying to earn the love that should have been freely given. Maybe you never knew me at all, I suggested. If this is how you want to be, fine, my mother said, ice in her voice now. But don't come crying to us when you realize what you've thrown away. The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of regret, tears of release, of grief for the family I'd never really had, of relief that I'd finally spoken my truth. Mark found me on the couch, staring at the wall. How did it go? He asked gently, sitting beside me. They didn't understand, I said. They'll never understand. He put his arm around me, pulling me close. I'm proud of you, he whispered into my hair. What you did took incredible courage. Later that day, the texts started coming from Melissa. What did you say to Mom? She's been crying all day. Then, you know how sensitive she is. You should apologize. And finally, this is so typical of you, making everything about yourself. Mom and Dad have done nothing but support us both. I didn't respond to any of them. There was nothing left to say. That night, I dreamt of doors closing, of bridges burning, of roads stretching toward horizons I couldn't quite see. I woke feeling lighter than I had in years, despite the heaviness of what had happened. The gift I'd given myself wasn't just freedom from expectation, it was permission to finally acknowledge the truth. The truth that sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family that will love you the way you deserve to be loved. The truth that walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing you can do. And the truth that the hole inside me, the one I'd tried to fill with their approval for so long, could only ever be filled by my own self-worth. For the first time in my life, I was choosing me. Years later, I realized that walking away wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, The first few months were the hardest. Every holiday felt like a gaping wound. Every family gathering I wasn't attending a silent reminder of the choice I'd made. But slowly, deliberately, I rebuilt my life. Not in defiance, but in healing. Mark was my anchor through it all. He never pushed me to reconcile, never suggested I was being too harsh. Instead, he listened. He validated. He helped me understand that the family I was creating, through friendships, through our relationship, through my own choices, was more real than the one I'd left behind. Therapy became my lifeline. I learned that setting boundaries isn't an act of anger, but an act of self-love. I discovered that the little girl who was always forgotten deserved to be seen, to be heard, to be cherished, and that I was the only one who could truly make that happen. My career flourished. Without the constant emotional drain of trying to earn my family's approval, I found energy I didn't know I possessed. The research I'd been passionate about, I dove into it completely. Awards came, recognition followed. But this time, it wasn't about proving my worth to anyone else. It was about proving it to myself. Melissa tried reaching out occasionally, text messages that started with accusation, then morphed into something closer to curiosity. "Mom's not doing well," one read. "She misses you." Another, "Are we really never going to speak again?" I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but out of protection. Healing isn't linear, and I was still learning to protect the peace I'd fought so hard to create. My parents? They existed now as distant memories. The pain had dulled, replaced by a profound understanding. Some people are best loved from a distance. Some relationships are toxic, even when they share your blood. The greatest revelation wasn't about them, it was about me. I learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation, that love isn't about tolerating hurt, but about respecting yourself enough to walk away when that hurt becomes a pattern. Have you ever reached a point where walking away was the only way to truly love yourself? Where setting a boundary meant choosing your own healing over someone else's comfort? Share your story in the comments below. What did choosing yourself look like for you? When did you realize your worth was not determined by others' recognition? What advice would you give to someone struggling to break free from a toxic family dynamic? Remember, your story matters. Your healing matters. You matter. Not everyone will appreciate you. Not everyone will see your worth. But that doesn't decrease your value. It simply reveals their limitations. Drop a comment. Share your truth. Keep healing.